Hey, good evening. Welcome to the Kaysville City Planning Commission meeting for February 28th, 2019. We will start with agenda item number 1, approval of the, we will back up slightly. We will welcome our chair. And as he's settling in, we will ask for approval of the minutes from the meeting of January 24th and February 14th.
I'll go ahead and move that we approve the minutes of January 24th, 2019 and February 14th, 2019.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Aye.
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 And we will relinquish the chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Back to
Go
the
ahead.
chair.
Go ahead.
You all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll move on until he's caught up. Item number 2, a conditional use permit for major home occupation B. Lawn care and pest control contractor for Angela Ashby at 326 North Apricot Grove.
Okay, just by way of introduction for that for Planning Commission and those in attendance. Ms. Ashby's submitted an application to run a business from her home at 8 North Apricot Grove at 326. You can see it here on the screen and also in your packet. It's in the Hill Farms development. And speaking with her, we kind of went back and forth on whether or not she needed to be here before you tonight, based on it is a contractor type business, and that's why it is before you, but simply she'll be making phone calls, doing paperwork, and using the address at the home for the business license. But equipment, everything else is off-site and has arrangements to be kept off-site already. All the work is done off-site. So based on my conversation with her and discussion on her intentions for the business, we felt good as staff just recommending approval without the need for additional conditions on this.
Okay. Any questions?
No, I'm guessing the pesticides are stored off-site as well.
Correct.
So, yeah, that's all I had.
All right, if there's no other questions, can we have a...
Well, I'll move that we grant a conditional use permit for major home occupation B, lawn care and pest control contractor for Angela Ashby at 326 North Apricot Grove.
I'll second. Aye.
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 Thank you. The next item is a conditional use permit for major home occupation B preschool for Aaron Hoffman at 321 North Autumn Cherry Way.
Okay, again, as a brief introduction, this is just down the street in the same neighborhood in Hill Farms to Subdivision. The application, again, for a home business where they're looking to do preschool. In this particular case, classes would be morning classes only, as anticipated, Tuesday through Thursday. So again, you have your 3- and 4-year-olds, preschool students who would come. And in speaking with the applicant, based on the block pattern in the area, she's got a kind of a plan that she's putting out to the parents for drop-off. So the traffic kind of flows one way, they drop them off, head out, so there aren't any conflicts or kids trying to run across the street to get into the home. So that seemed to be something that would work out very well. And also in discussions with her, we often do, in comparison with a daycare type situation, there is a requirement because of the group and nature of the business to place a limit on either the number of people coming or the vehicles. 12 tends to be that limit with a daycare or preschool. For her particular structure, 10 was amenable to her, and she felt that more likely she'd probably have about 8 students at a time, but 10 would certainly be something she was willing to adhere to. So staff has recommended approval with that specific limitation of no more than 10 students at any time. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Is the applicant here this evening?
I believe, yeah.
Do you want to come up and Lyle, is it just me or is that really out of focus? I'm hoping it's...
We can attempt to clear it up.
I can't
That's
see
as clear as can be.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I really was losing my mind a little bit there. Just Good evening, welcome. Do you want to just tell us your name and kind of what you're planning on doing there?
Yeah, so my name's Erin Hoffman, and I'm just planning to do a morning-only preschool out of my home. I've been teaching preschool for 5 years down in Holiday and would just like to be able to move my business a little bit closer.
Okay. And Lyle mentioned you've already spoken to several of the neighbors?
Yes, I personally texted all of the neighbors across the street from me as well as on either side of me to let them know that it would be occurring, and all of them were fine with it. And then I also posted it on our Hill Farms Facebook site, and there's another local site as well to let people know that I was planning on doing it and to let me know if there were any questions or concerns.
Okay, great. Any questions for the applicant?
No, I actually appreciate the fact that you tried to schedule this so that it was not conflicting with any of the traffic for school. So that's so we don't have to worry about that time.
Is there, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And
Becky.
the only comment that I would have, maybe as you talk to them about the traffic, I have the situation and they park in my driveway just because they think it's just for a moment.
Yes.
And it does cause a problem. So maybe just tell them to be mindful of not parking in front of driveways.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, so there's just one session?
Yes, I'm
Tuesday.
just planning this year to just do one session Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday mornings.
Okay, 3 days?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, if there's no other questions, can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for a major home occupation B preschool for Erin Hoffman at 321 North Autumn Cherry Way.
Second?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much.
luck.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is a public hearing for the rezone of 1.31 acres of property at 1048 West Tyler's Way from RA Residential Agricultural to R110 Single Family Residential for Mac Ray and Sheila Baxter.
Okay. By way of introduction on this, and I'll just remind the Planning Commission, as stated, this one is scheduled for a public hearing this evening. The property at the end of the cul-de-sac, which again, it does look a little bit blurry, just off of Tyler's Way, is a pretty large property. It actually has on the property now an existing home and a large detached garage building. And I met the Baxters several months ago now, and as they expressed their interest in potentially dividing the property into 2 lots so that they could essentially convert the garage into a dwelling. So the existing home would stay and that would become a new house. We've looked at many different options. Tricky to try and put something together that would ultimately affect change the ordinance. Would apply citywide. So what we've just come up with is simply going for the R110 zoning district. The reason for it essentially is just the difference in frontage requirements on the properties. So in the RA zone that's currently there, typically lots are at least 100 feet wide as we measure back from the frontage, and on these cul-de-sacs that can be a little bit tricky to meet. R120 is a more common zone that you see in West Kaysville, in the half acres, almost the same as the RA. It also still requires 90, and in different revisions and concepts that have been shown by the Baxters, they're just a little shy of being able to do the 90. This kind of gives you an idea that roughly, in order to split it, they can keep the one lot in certainly compliance and consistent with everything else in the neighborhood. But the other lot, again, as far as frontage, would be a little bit shorter, probably about 80 feet. But both lots would meet or exceed a half acre in size. So and at least in that respect, it could be consistent with other things in the area. And that's essentially the ask. The R110 and the RA zones are very similar as far as the requirements and what is permitted within them. The primary difference between an RA and an R1 zoning designation tends to be farm animals. So if somebody wanted horses or goats, larger animals other than chickens, then they would come to the Planning Commission typically for a conditional use. They can still do those things in the R1 zones is when they get the conditional use, so they can still do them, whereas in the RA zone, they just wouldn't have to come before you to ask. They're simply permitted. That tends to be one of the biggest differences that we see between them. The other ordinances are referenced in the report. If you have additional questions or details on that, I'd be happy to look into it. Again, as a rezone right now, we're not actually looking at the subdivision, but it gives you an idea on what they're trying to accomplish looking at this image here. We're looking to get a recommendation from you this evening to pass along to the City Council. Should that zoning then be approved at a later time, we would go through a subdivision process to formally split the lots. One recommendation or idea that was mentioned in the staff report, if this seems to appear appropriate and is a direction that you'd recommend, you could also do it together with a development agreement. So again, theoretically by acreage, there's enough land that the R110 could create more lots. Practically, and without the PRUD and some of those more creative ways to develop, it's not feasible. But if that gives additional comfort or something, that could be an item you consider as part of your recommendation, whether you wish to see that or not, as well as before passing along recommendation up to you to determine. With that, I'll cease my comments and be happy to take any questions, but again, just remind you of the public hearing.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone that would like to come forward and speak on this issue? Just please come to the podium, state your name, and let us know your thoughts. That was easy. All right, we'll close the public hearing. Comments, questions?
I have a question. So that existing garage will stay or go?
And the applicants here, I may let them speak to that. My understanding is they intend to keep it
Okay.
and essentially convert it. I don't know if they would have an addition or anything with it, but into a dwelling. So we only allow one building per lot to be used as a dwelling, and that's the reason that they would have to split it. And then there may be some building code conversion issues that they'll have to look into, but would stick around.
So the only way the other lot could be made into two lots would be through a PRUD overlay?
Yeah, so the two ways to develop lots and to go deep typically, again, we have their typical lots that have the minimum frontage requirements, and you, as a commission, you'd be familiar with flag lots as one way to get behind and develop the rear of a lot. It would require additional frontage as well, so you'd have 90 plus 30 on either lot, so that really isn't even an option under this scenario. Okay. Same for this, really, even if you went down, tried to get to the side, it looks like it's there, but in order to meet its required frontage next to this lot, there isn't room for a flag lot. So the only options to develop more than the two homes that are really here are kind of to demolish buildings that are on site, reconfigure things altogether, and extend a private road and develop in that manner that you could split lots off of. So it's possible, pretty difficult challenge or expensive one to do if that were the route they chose.
So that's, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so so just clarify in my mind, so that's the reason they were requesting the R110 is because of the frontage requirement that an R114 or R120 doesn't fit within that because
Correct.
of the way it's laid out.
Correct.
But it still would allow them, even though it may not be real practical, it would be zoned that they could put a few homes back in there.
Correct. Based on acreage alone,
Yeah.
there's room to do that. And that is something you could simply restrict with a development agreement. So if this seems okay, but you don't like the idea of maybe another home or two popping up there, you could recommend approval subject to a development agreement that limits the development to a total of 2 dwelling units on the entire property, and that would restrict them for certain.
Two dwellings don't bother me because it coincides with the neighbors next door. There's 2 of them there, but one of them is flag lot going back, and this looks like actually probably a bigger parcel, the 1.3 acres. So I'm not concerned about the 2, but I would be concerned that we put some restriction in the development agreement, but that they could do no more than that.
Yeah, and I think this arrangement's more desirable than a flag lot situation will be. So I like this, and that's what I was just going to say. We're just basically changing the zone to get that slightly shortened frontage to make it compliant. Let me ask you about I think you mentioned in the report, the separation between the two buildings and the...
Yeah, so currently between this detached garage building and the home, there's 20 feet, I believe is the distance. So side yard requirement is 8 feet per lot, so it's 16 feet would be necessary. So he meets that, so we know it can be divided. Something we did look at is possibly calling it a flag lot, but that would require even different setbacks altogether. And so the zoning, should this be desirable, seem to accommodate and meet what we need as far as distance and separation and frontage.
So if we did the R110 and put the development agreement to say that it would just be that, they would, if they wanted to separate it out or do a PRUD, they'd have to come back before us with a plan.
Correct.
That seems like a workable solution to me. But
Lyle, can you put up the zoning map? Do you have that?
Property we're looking at in the middle of the screen.
Do we have R110 anywhere else?
We do all over the other side of the city. Not that I'm aware of west of I-15. So we have R114s, R120, RA, so it is a unique Z designation for west of I-15. I can pull up the full city zoning map here in just a moment and show you east of I-15 we have a lot of R18, which is a smaller designation, which is all the gray, and many R110 type subdivisions. And I'll happily pull that up here in just a moment.
Is R110 the only designation that meets the frontage standard?
So R110 does, if you go up to an R114, it has a 90-foot frontage requirement again. If you go down to an R18, which is an 8,000 square foot lot minimum, it's a 65-foot frontage requirement. So you could say there are others that meet the frontage, but they're technically more intense than the R110. So it was the least intense that allowed for the requested development or split.
And again, if density is the question, then we can make it uniform with the surrounding areas. Just have a different zone through the development agreement.
I usually have Wilf right here in my ear saying, don't spot zone.
Yeah.
We don't create islands of zoning. And granted, I see a lot of different islands there, but we are creating something entirely unique in this area.
Could we reiterate that the reason that we're doing it is just for the frontage only?
Well, and I'll state, so spot zoning is a term that we commonly hear. There's nothing illegal about it, and it's debatable whether or not it's great practice or not. When you have an R1, always be careful not to advocate one way or another on this, where it's legislative. You have all kinds of discretion as a council on your decision where you want to go. But you'll see different colors throughout the zoning map, and whether you think that's a good way to go or not, highly subjective is what it comes down to. I would say clearly if you're putting a slaughtering plant in the middle of a neighborhood or industrial type scenario smack dab in the middle of a block, that seems to be considered bad practice. But the residential would be probably more open to interpretation on what's good or not with the zoning. But it does give you that legislative case-by-case ability to look at, is the request reasonable? If so, it's a way to accommodate it without changing rules that affect the entire city.
And ultimately, this is a recommendation.
Correct.
Okay.
I was going to say, I'm comfortable with it because I think it seems reasonable to accommodate what they're trying to do. And it's not as though you're putting a little piece of commercial property or agricultural property in the middle of a neighborhood or something like that. So
Right.
I think if
Yeah, plus with the condition through the development agreement that it's only 2 lots allowed.
yeah.
That saves it, I think.
Yeah.
All right, any other discussion? Can we get a recommendation?
I'll move that we recommend approval of the rezone of 1.31 acres at 1048 West Tyler Way from RA to R110, with the condition that a development agreement be put in place to ensure that no more than 2 units are in this 2-parcel subdivision.
I'll second that.
Do you?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Do I want to pass the baton now? Is that what you're asking?
No, I will if you want.
No, that's all right.
You're doing great.
Okay, the next item is a request to rezone 3 acres of property, 1576 West, 200 North from RA to the R2 zoning district to include the PRUD overlay zone for Hugh Park on behalf of Robert Green.
Okay. All right, so this will be familiar to the Planning Commission. I'll hopefully give a detailed enough introduction to it as a reminder and where things are at, and leave some time for the applicant maybe to talk more specifically on the development. We have held the public hearing that's required for this, so it'll be up to the Planning Commission as to if or how much feedback you wish to hear otherwise from residents on it again this evening. Just in short, we've looked at this originally as a property that included a rezone over a portion of the property to the north. The Nooner piece, as we've been referring to it as we spoke about it, we've actually cut back the property that we're looking at and considering for the rezone to be solely applied to the green property, which is the 3-acre piece that fronts 200 North. Since the last time the Planning Commission met, you'd been presented with the development and several concerns. You asked that the developer go back and meet with some of the neighbors, see if they could do some back and forth and resolve some of the concerns from the neighbors, and maybe perhaps let them speak a little bit more directly to that. They did hold a meeting. I'll state that I was there. I was a little bit of a party poop. I had a bad headache, so I parked out on the couch and listened for my name, but I did hear almost all the details and a lot of it, so I can affirm otherwise a lot of the conversation. But I do know that they were there.
Sorry for interrupting. How many people attended that?
Probably 20 to 25, somewhere in that range. So it was pretty well attended. They had sent out emails to many of the neighbors, and a few were there the whole time. Some of them came in and out a little bit as they were available to attend, but I think they had some pretty amicable, at least open conversation, and were able to express what some of the concerns are and rationales behind things. To what the Planning Commission mentioned, so what's currently proposed, it had originally been 37 units on the 4 acres. Currently they've put together a proposal with 29 units. The units themselves are technically located on just the 3 acres of property, again controlled by the Green family. You'll see here in the plan that they've shown to the north of that still some property that's on the Nooner piece. One of the concerns that was raised is based on the covenants of the homeowners association to the north, or the subdivision, that they wouldn't be able to build on that property, at least without the consent of the owners, I believe. So they've removed that, but are still hoping to utilize that as open space. So no structures on it, but that they could make that accessible to the residents of this development. I'll simply note that if it's left out, I mean, it is listed within the development agreement as to how they would use it, but it's, as far as the city's typical requirements, kind of just bonus. So because it wouldn't be part of the development or subdivision and the property being subdivided when we do our platting, they would still have to meet their minimum open space and other requirements within the 3 acres, and that would just be open space in addition to what would be found there. So they've understood that and tried to put together a plan that would still meet that on its own. The commission had asked for staff to look at in addressing some of the concerns, information about traffic. So I went and did some research on typically on a single family development, you generate roughly 10 trips per day per dwelling. With a multifamily, the literature essentially shows that they're a little bit less, roughly 7 trips a day per unit. We totaled here, if you average out what it would expect on it, it looks like I'm on the wrong page in my notes. You could expect roughly about 203 new trips that would go on to from this development on an average day. 200 North itself, it's a collector street, one of our major streets within the city. We have done some traffic counts on it. Granted, these show roughly about 10,000 counts, AADT, or average annual daily traffic. The facility could still, based on its size, the number of lanes, travel lanes that are there, and because it has the center turn lanes, function at a capacity of around 18,000 plus trips and still meet acceptable levels of service. So this will certainly increase the traffic, push it up, but it seems to be within the capacities that the facilities are designed for within the area, based on our look at staff. The other items that have come up, partly from the neighborhood discussion, that are stated in the development agreement is whether it's this area or the development at large, what to do with fencing along the perimeter between the rail trail and the development. It was originally thought that that may not be feasible. Tesoro Gas Company has a pipeline that runs along the eastern side of this development, and with that easement rights and the ability to control somewhat what's in there, I've reached out to them directly and talked about the situation, and we believe both with them and UTA also that's the other side of the property boundary. There should be a means, either 1 inch on one side right on the border or 1 inch on the other, that some sort of fencing could be accommodated. So let me leave it at that. If there were other specific issues directed, specific for us as staff, that's what's in the report. I'll state perhaps that there has been correspondence. I know it's gone through the City Council and the Planning Commission. We've held hearings, we've heard comments through previous meetings. Some of the other items that have been expressed that we didn't address here through the report, but that I've seen since, dealt with stormwater, flooding issues and concern in the area. We had talked about it in previous meetings. We believe as staff, and reviewing this with our city engineer and public works who deals specific with that system, that some of the specific concerns addressed, that this could be a little bit separate from it based on where the storm drain is that would service it. Ultimately, at the rezone stage, without the specific engineering details and calculations that we do through the subdivision review process, we don't have the specifics as to exactly how it's going to be dealt with, but we do have ordinance requirements and expectations on how that would work, and believe that something appropriate could be designed that wouldn't harm or exacerbate existing issues or of the area. With that, I'll probably pass it back to the Planning Commission. The applicant is here this evening. I'm happy to take other questions. Just remind you that, again, we're looking for a recommendation on this item that would ultimately go to the City Council for a final decision for the rezone. The development agreement that's been prepared, in particular, the items of note, I think, are through Section 2 with the standards and guidelines. Some of the things that the developer has agreed to place limitations on or assurances to make sure that development looks like they're presenting it to you. So as you review this and discuss it this evening, if that seems acceptable, you could be passed along. You're welcome to recommend changes to items within it, number of units, and parking issues, fencing, if there anything specific that you'd like to add, if that is what you think it takes to make it palatable, or ultimately recommend a denial or tabling it if you feel that there's need for additional information. And so with that, I'll close my comments and return it back to you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just real quickly, I'm assuming that most of our audience is here for this particular issue this evening and not for the final plat approval. I just want to remind everyone here that we have already held 2 public hearings on this particular issue, and it is not our intention to hold a third one this evening. While we truly appreciate you all being here, and we, for good or for bad, we like people that are involved in this. We have opened it up twice. We've received several letters, emails of communication from people, so I think we've got a fairly good idea of where people are at on this. Whether we forward this to the City Council with a favorable or unfavorable recommendation, they will hear you at that point as well. So your voice isn't being stifled this evening. We've already had this opportunity. We recognize many of you who've been here already and voiced concerns, which is why we've tabled it twice. We agreed with a lot of those. There were some concerns that we brought up in addition to those that you had, and we asked the developer to address these. And it looks like some of them have been addressed. We'll kind of cover each of these, but we'd like to invite the developer to come on up, introduce yourself again, and then we'll ask away. Anything you guys wanted to discuss before the developer comes up? Okay. Please.
Again, my name is Hugh Park, representing the Robert Green family. So, we've made some, we've had some meetings with, or we had a meeting with the public and listened to some of their concerns and tried to incorporate some thoughts and ideas of what they had in there, and a lot of that's reflected in the development agreement. I'm sure you've had time to review it and look at it. And so we've pared it down from 37 units to 29 units, and that was some of the feedback that we had from the Planning Commission. And so I'm here to answer any questions or anything that you may have.
Thank you.
Now, not attending that, one of the comments, or one of the emails we got talked about some of the privacy fencing or fencing. That there was going to be either a brick or some type of fencing, and now it's moved to a vinyl.
At the meeting, it was asked if we could do a concrete fence or some type of fencing, because originally, when I had first spoken with Tesoro, they were not particularly in favor of having any fencing at all along their line there. Maybe I misinterpreted, but I believe that what they said is they do not want any fencing along their easement. And so the plan, we were originally planning on putting some fencing up around here, up around this one, and possibly in off of the easement up here in this common area. And it was asked if we could do some fencing along there, so I talked to Lyle about that. He extended a phone call to Tesoro and UTA and was able to get and let them know what the city would want, and they seemed amenable to allow us to do that. So as we looked at that, we put in the development agreement that we could put, quite often fencing goes around a project like this, and we put a vinyl fence in around there.
Yeah, my biggest concern is really between this development and the properties to the west. To have
Right
some
here.
type of that runs along the west side. The other side you're buffered by the rail trail and then by Smith's Marketplace. So there's a natural buffer that's already been built there. But me personally, I would like to see not a vinyl fence, but some type of a block or decorative type fence that acts more as a buffer.
Well, currently there is a wood fence there that's been existing with the Kimball property, and so we were going to repair that fence because I believe it's been there on that property for quite a while, and our intention was to go through and repair anything that needed to be on that fence and maintain it and take care of it. And and then continue on with the vinyl fence above and beyond, because I'm assuming, I don't know exactly, we haven't had the property staked, so I'm assuming that that fence is either on the property line or it might be on the other property line, and then trying to put two fences right next to each other, you run into that issue of things growing up between them and just taking care of and maintaining that other fence. And so we anticipated taking care of that other fence, and notice we have that road that goes along there that, you know, so we're kind of buffered between, we don't have units that back right on to that adjacent property on the west.
All right, in the meeting though, what was committed to them? Did you commit to do what type of fence did you commit to?
We committed that we would take a look into finding out what the fencing that we could do, and we did not commit to anything specific in that meeting. I said that we would take a look at doing some fencing along there, and that's what we did. But I did not commit to a concrete fence or anything at that point in time.
Now, you mentioned that you didn't want to build a fence right next to it because what might grow up in between, but you're going to repair that fence. I guess what would it take to actually replace that fence? You probably need permission from the neighbors.
We could talk to them and find out. And again, that's why I say I don't know if that fence is on their side, therefore being their property, or whether it's on our side. I would imagine, you know, I could go to them, talk to them, and find out if they would be amenable. I don't know if that fence means something to them because they want an all-wood fence around their property to match the rest of their property. I haven't had that discussion.
Okay. Then just another one I have with back where we got the open space, the green space back there. One of the concerns was, is that actually a water detention back there?
You know, I would imagine that we're not going to be able to detain back there because I don't know how we would get and that's why I say this is a conceptual site. We may end up losing a unit or two because of where to place a detention basin. I'm not sure, but I don't anticipate putting a detention basin back there in that area because I don't know if we could get water back there and then water back out to 200 North because all the stormwater is going to have to go out to the storm drain at 200 North.
I have a question about the stormwater. So, and I'm not sure if it's for you or Lyle. Lyle, can we assume that if the city council approves the project, the stormwater will be taken into consideration, right? They won't approve a project that will have future issues. I mean, that's a huge concern, which I understand as far as the neighborhood goes.
So yeah, every development, as we go through a subdivision process, we have within our ordinance requirements for how they take care of their stormwater. And so they have to prove through engineering and stamped engineered drawings that they've met that. They either have to detain water on site that can only be released at a certain rate into our system. 0.2 CFS cubic feet per second is how that's designed. So our systems are set up to take in so much water. And I read concerns on the issues with the detention basin nearby. I've talked to our engineering and public works about that, and I'm familiar with that situation, and it sounds like not everyone's favorable to that type of system. However, if water's going there, it's not going elsewhere, and so if they're detaining it into this, and there are any number of ways to do that. For example, we've got a system underneath the parking lot out here that detains water, or you can have open ponds, pipe and different things can do that. So whether technically and financially it ends up making sense, there are viable ways to do it. Okay. And we feel confident that this can. We do have storm drain in the area that it can quickly tap into. And from what I've seen, it's a separate system the way that the lines go. We've got multiple kind of channels that run into some of our main storm drain lines that would actually separate it from some of the water west of this. And so we're not adding water into those same systems that sound as though there's some concerns. And just the way to control the water as well. So when you put in streets and a hard surface, obviously it collects on the surface, but it also becomes more manageable to channel and direct where you want it. And so, not being the engineer, but the engineering can determine and show how that's done with the system, and that would be a requirement of this in every development through the platting process.
So right now there's no division to separate it and so the water would flow downhill. But you're saying if with development and properly engineered, it would be able to collect and detain and collect that water and separate it. So it actually could help solve the problem they're having down off of Seymour.
Occasionally it
and
does
some of those
that,
other
yeah.
areas.
So I suspect, and I looked at some of our elevation maps, and they're highly generic with some of the LiDAR systems that we use to shoot elevation, but generally we run northeast to southwest, mountain to the lake, and so the water tends to flow in a direction like this, just based on elevation. So it probably sheet flows right now right into the Kimball property and others to the west and heads that direction. When you build streets and others, you put in high back curb, it stops the water, puts it into a system, and you can direct it wherever you want. So again, that's still to be designed and determined, but those are things we would look at through our planning process. And
So based upon that, this development could help relieve the pressure as far as the storm drainage issues downstream? Is that what you're saying?
possibly.
Okay. And the development wouldn't be approved and had it not be, without being correctly engineered to take care of that issue? Right, I guess I'm just wondering, is this, obviously it's a concern and they've seen water problems in other places, but can the community over there feel confident that?
Well, and what I will say to this, so they'll be required to take care of the water on their property and their development.
Okay.
So if there are issues elsewhere, even though it's close within the city system, it wouldn't be incumbent upon new development to take care of those issues. Unless it's somehow directly related to the site and how that's working. So, and that I can't speak to as directly. I believe they're kind of separate from what I've seen of the system and how it's lined up and spoken with our public works. The storm drain lines that feed into that other pond and this would kind of be disconnected. But so, yeah, anyway, in short, it wouldn't be incumbent upon them to fix other issues, assuming that there's reality there, and it sounds as there's some legitimate concern on some of that.
Okay.
They'll simply be taking care of their development in this issue and making sure it doesn't add to or create new problems beyond that.
Okay.
You know, one of the comments I made before too is I think this location is actually a good location for this. You look at our general plan and you look at locations to do a higher density like this. You know, I commented, I think this is a good spot for it. It's kind of isolated. It's you know, some people are worried of a precedence being set. I don't think that this particular location would do that. But I also stated that it needed to be, I think the development needed to be right. I thought it was maybe a little bit too high density. I commented that I'd like to actually see it a little bit less. You've reduced the number of units, but your units per acre, there's only about a 200 square foot difference between them. So even though you've reduced the number, the density is still pretty much about the same. We did, actually, we got an email from somebody that actually kind of played with it a little bit. I don't know if you saw that. I actually liked it when I looked at it. It increased a little bit of visitor parking and created a few more areas where you might be able to detain without interfering with the open space and the playground area. And most of those were on the northwest and southwest, and then over there in the far southeast corners where they had taken some of those out. Me personally, I still think it could be a good development, and I would still like to see maybe a little bit more density or less density with either a little bit more either visitor parking or turnaround area and some of those. But I do have to admit, I like the flow, the way you've flowed this time. It flows much, much better. So I think you've done a good job in the way it flows. You know, me, if we were to take out, they took out 7. I think that's maybe too many. I'm looking, there's like 3 that I'd probably take out of that to kind of open it up and maybe add some parking.
Right there.
No, go up to the far northwest corner. Actually they took 2 out of that, but I'd maybe take like that one. You could extend parking up there, or even, and then in the southwest, right there, then they did the southeast. they actually, each one of the blocks, they took stuff out, but I'm looking going, you know, there's, maybe that even the southeast, maybe not as much, but it would allow for additional parking, or maybe even if you took that out, some area for detention. But I do like the way you redesigned it with the flow. I like the open space up there, even though the density per square foot is still about the same if you don't take that other acre into account. If you take the whole thing into account, it did reduce it. But that upper spot, is that going to be owned by you guys, or is it still going to be part of that other? Because that's what I was a little unclear on.
As of right now, we're looking at a purchase, so rather than an easement.
So if you do incorporate that, it does reduce the density and brings it down closer to.
So if we did, you know, an easement, or I know this has been a topic of discussion here. So if we did you know, technically this would be, I guess the density would be based solely on the 3 acres. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as meeting a development requirement, the density would be based solely on the property included in the subdivision, which would be the 3 acres.
Okay.
You know, in our last meeting, Commissioner Sunloff, who's not here, commented about the other development Destination Homes did on the old motel site. That's, you know, that's a higher density than even this, and he kind of compared that. In my mind, they're two. You can't really compare them just because of the location. That one, it's bordered by a creek. It does have some residential to the north of it, but it isn't in this heavy populated area, at least from what I'm seeing. So in my mind, I kind of separate them and go, they're not really comparable, even though he was using that as a case for the density. And I drove by that. That is a really nice development they did over there, and I think it's been an asset to the community, particularly with what was there before.
Yeah.
This, I still think that our community does need diversity, and still $300,000, $50,000, $400,000 units. It's going to still attract, I think, a good mix in there. We've had comments about lower income, or bringing in an element that may not want necessarily, and I don't believe that. I don't see that with here. But I would like to see maybe a little bit more, just a couple of those that we might be able to have some parking so it doesn't congest the flow, and possibly an area where you could have some type of detention that can help solve some of the problems. Because I do think if we can separate and divert the water and try to direct and flow that so it doesn't flow downhill, in my mind, I think that's got to help the issue that they've had down on Seymour Drive. Because I do remember the flood a couple of years ago, and several of the homes did get hit pretty hard. And in my mind, I think this can only help if it's done correctly.
Lyle, I have a question. So in a development like this, is there a rule that you have to have so many guest parking stalls per fixed homes or anything like that?
Let me pull up the code so I don't misquote it for you. So in a multifamily, multi-unit type development such as this, there's a minimum of 8 spaces required, and then 1.5 spaces per every unit over 5. And then, of course, because of the development agreement or the rezone action, you can ask for anything above that you think is necessary.
Okay.
Probably a rule of thumb. We don't do many of these in Kaysville, so it's been a while. I had to go back to my experience working within Salt Lake County. Before that, this is about the only type of development that we saw were townhome and these types of projects. And often they would have the 1.5 spaces per unit, and then for every 4 units, an additional parking stall. So ours is actually catered fairly similarly. But if you saw, what they've got here are 2 parking spaces within a garage on each unit, plus driveways. There is, at least conceptually indicated, a 1 parking area. But yeah, if there's need for additional guest parking, you would have some discretion on stating, yeah, we want to see X number. If you'd like me to work the math on those calculations I just gave you, I could give you an idea what that's like for 29 units.
Yeah, okay. How many do you have in your plan for
Right
guest parking?
now, we just have, obviously, it's just showing that one there. This isn't working, but the one down there on the southeast corner there. We've also looked at possibly putting another set up there between the 2 units that are back to back each other, and maybe another 1 or 2 on the other side. This, like I say, we should have probably put another 1 or 2 in there. This is fully conceptual.
Yeah.
So we knew that the city was going to require certain guest parking within the subdivision. That was one of the concerns that the citizens had that evening. And one way that we address it is we've had homeowners associations before that actually ticket people that park on the roads. And so no on-street parking is allowed. And quite often, just because of how everything is laid out, you really can't, you might get a couple of people trying to park here, but if we were to put another parking spot right here and another 1 or 2 right there, that's going to preclude, then you find that you're parking in front of everybody's driveways. The only place I'd think you'd have a problem is over here. And so the CC&Rs would be what we encouraged in, and what we were planning on setting up is an HOA that has a website. So that if somebody wants to get on the website, it's not like they have to get on, they can just get on the website, enter in a complaint, and the HOA can come out and keep an eye on the ticketing. So it's very, very responsive. And so and then one of the other concerns was garbage cans, because we anticipate each one of these, we're not going to have a community dumpster. Each one of these would have an individual garbage can, just like everyone else, but that garbage can needs to be placed within the unit inside the garage. And so the design of the home would need to allow to be able to pull in a garbage can and have it inside the garage there, so that they're not around on the side of the house or somewhere else. And those are required to be in, except on garbage night. So, and I believe that's in the development agreement.
Okay, thank you. So just for this plan, there's maybe 4 extra? Am I not understanding parking spots?
Yeah, I'd say we've got about 4 here, but once we get the final design, then
Right.
we actually want to have a little bit more.
Okay.
Because, each unit has 2 in front, obviously, but we do need to have more areas where we do need some off-street parking. And so we can add that on there.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up on the numbers I promised, you'd probably looking at probably 8 guest parking stalls under our ordinance and about 11 under the other example I gave you.
Okay.
Just as maybe a benchmark to consider. And just the final comment. So we don't have all the dimensions and details on, again, the engineering of the roads and such, but I suspect we wouldn't allow on-street parking in it either, based on clearance for emergency vehicles and so forth. So having them in the designated places is always a good thing.
So if we said, okay, we want at least 8 or maybe 10 guest parking stalls, would that change the green space and maybe require them to remove a townhome or 2? I'm not sure dimensions, how you compare those, but.
It could, potentially.
Okay.
And so I've not run those calculations based on the dimensions and details we have at this conceptual plan, but
Okay.
that is a factor that could come into play. So as you find things that you want to see and would like to require, if other mandatory requirements of the ordinance need to be met, then the units have to be reduced to meet that. That is a likely or probable scenario that could occur.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Is there a plan to connect up to the rail trail, those paths?
Yes, there is. Well, because we're going to be putting a fence along here.
Right.
We'll probably put 1 to 2 gates out there, or just passageways so that people can connect out. I'm assuming we do one right in front of this trail right here where the Smiths connects, and then maybe another one down in here or up in here somewhere. But yes, that's the full intention. That's the attractive part about this piece, is
Right.
because people can just go right out and right out onto the trail right from their front door.
And then
we want that accessible.
Yeah, and then the entrance from 200 North, are those 2 roadways like a one-way each way?
Yes, that's what that would be.
And is that intended to line up with the,
This
across
is
the
pretty
street?
close right now. They just got on Google Earth, kind of lined it up. It might need to move a few feet. Obviously, that will.
but the intention is to line it up?
The intention is to line it up.
Is that
So
Mountain
you can
Vistas
see where
Road?
it's,
Yeah.
it's pretty close
Yeah.
as to where it was. But I think I had an email from Amy Jarman that the community across the street addressed that, and I think that we find that if you have obviously the intersections lining up, that's a much safer intersection rather than offsetting it,
Right.
you know, and causing oncoming traffic to run into each other.
And then the picture that we have of these homes, are all of the homes going to be somewhat like this, or are there going to be different models?
As of right now, there is basically one type of home. That could change a little bit. We might have one end unit maybe be a little bit larger on one side or something, or a little pop out or something. This is just a conceptual idea that we threw together to kind of give an idea. Just with some, we want it, in the development agreement, we talked about all cement type products, either hardy, stucco, and brick. And so that's just kind of a conceptual idea that we have, and obviously it's going to change.
Yeah.
That's just kind of an idea.
But the way I look at this, that's going to be the side that fronts the road, right? So like, for example,
So this side, the garage sides, and Lyle, did we only print one?
That's all I've included in this. I can find
Okay.
other items.
Sorry, I have some others. So this is the front of the townhome here, so that you would enter in. You don't enter the townhome with the driveway off of 2nd North. The units from 2nd North will have the way that we've had it designed, and we look at it, is there's basically a back door that comes in that's off of a family room, and that in this plan, it looks very similar. It looks like it could be the front. And
Okay.
so that's what would be along 200 North. So you're just not looking at the back
right.
of a building.
That's what I was worried about. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So I've got some, I could pull them up, and I've got some that I could send you, or to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. But you can kind of see up front on the side over here. Okay, there we are. So that's the actual back of the unit right there.
Oh, the back, okay.
So that was one thing that we felt was important for along 200 North anyway, was to be able to have something as you're driving down there, what the streetscape would look like with these units right here.
So there's not an intention to put a fence along 200 North?
Right now, no, we feel like, if we feel like maybe a 3-rail fence or something in the future, I don't know if that would even fit with the architecture or not. That's still to be up, but there's no intention to put a fence along there right now. It's to kind of leave it open with landscaping out front, just so that you're not driving down and have this big fence hiding the project.
You have a sidewalk there too, right?
Yeah, we'll have a sidewalk out front.
And then over in the what is that? The southeast corner, there's that road that just stubs. Is the parking lot used? is that a parking lot on the opposite side that's supposed to kind of act as a hammerhead, or?
This right here?
Yeah.
That is some parking stalls.
So do you turn around using those parking stalls? If someone's parked there, then what happens?
We wouldn't permit parking stalls likely if they're mandatory parking stalls to be used for turnaround purpose.
Say that
So
again.
we've got to have assurance that they're clear
Yeah.
to be used as a turnaround, so.
Why not have a small cul-de-sac turn circle there? Is that just,
You know,
Possible to do still through the subdivision process, and if those are specific things you see, those are good things to mention.
well, I just,
wondering.
what's the current idea? Just that the road just stops, or how's there?
yeah, right now that's how we have it designed, so if we need to put a hammerhead or something in there, or make it so that people can turn around there.
And typically, our emergency services, if it's less than 150 feet, that may not require it. So those are some of the details that, again, we've not so specifically looked at,
Right.
said that it does or doesn't, but that's a good comment, that if it is a turnaround requirement, no, the parking will not work for that.
So I have a question. If we, if we recommended approval of this as is, do we also need to look at the development agreement right now? Or do we, you know what I mean, does it go hand in hand to city council with a recommendation, or?
So the development agreement is going to carry forward to the city council
Okay.
with your recommendation.
Right.
So your recommendation could be to recommend approval as written. It could be to recommend approval subject to changes and whatever they might be, items that have been discussed. You may recommend denial ultimately. Then it would be up to the applicant to carry forward if they choose to the city council. The city council would then see your recommendation, but may go differently. But I suspect that they'll also want to see a development agreement if they're willing to entertain it, whether you've modified it or not.
Okay. Okay.
In our last meeting, Lyle, you talked about the water. You'd had conversations on that. Could you just kind of refresh real quick what they found?
So I guess there are two items. So there had been concern about water pressure, which originally I understood to likely be irrigation water and their sprinkler systems. So Davis Weber, he runs most of that, and we hear that frequently. I think there is probably, depending on the usage at times, fighting your neighbors for the right time of day to water your lawn, that there will be some pressure. I know they've got some projects that they're working on currently to correct that and get additional pressure back in. The culinary side of things, I think, is what I came to understand was actually the concern that there are some homes that struggle with culinary pressure in their home. The information I have from our public works teams who operates the water system is our lines have really high pressure, and they have to for fire hydrant requirements at about 2,000 psi, 3,000 gallons a minute, if I'm remembering correctly, well above what you would run in a home. So, and we test our hydrants regularly. We're not aware of any pressure issues on the culinary system in the area. So concerns that are expressed may be valid, but they're likely direct into the home and the levels that they've got rather than the system at large and the main lines.
So how do water shares work on that? Is that?
So, I apologize.
But, I was just saying, how does it work in there? Is there enough?
So they would be required, again, through the subdivision process to verify with the irrigation company, Davis Weber, that they've got sufficient shares to do it. They're going to look at it on a case-by-case basis, so it depends on the amount of hard surface, or reverse that, the amount of area that would be irrigated.
Come up with their plan.
Yeah, and they're going to say, okay, you've got an acre of irrigation, you need X number of shares to cover so many acre feet of water. We require that be turned over permanently, essentially, to guarantee that those waters will remain with the property and the amount of irrigation directed. So it's a similar scenario. Sewer's another one that's come up on this previously, is can it be serviced? If the utility companies that are required to provide services to the site cannot do so, they will not sign off it, and we will not be able to approve and move forward with the subdivision. So even if a rezone is approved, but we run into issues through engineering or through the utility companies, is their ability to serve it. Just because the zone's in place does not guarantee that the development will occur, but it gives at least the initial step to the developer that it's very expensive to engineer a subdivision to take that next step, because the city said something like that is something that, you know, we're okay with. Go figure out the technical issues, and it has happened that technical issues don't get figured out, and the development, doesn't happen.
All right, thanks.
So the sewer issues that were brought up a couple times ago, that's one of those technical issues that will be developed or worked on after the city.
Yeah, and so generically, and I've been in touch multiple times with the sewer district myself, their ideas on how it could work.
Okay.
And so it's not an outright, there's no chance, no way. And the nitty-gritty details, again, still be fleshed out with the engineering, pun intended, I suppose, but but with them, there are multiple options in multiple places where that sewage could be taken, and that helps with the capacity concerns that were originally expressed.
Okay. All right.
Betty, any thoughts or comments?
It's been good.
Okay. Just personally, thank you. I appreciate all the questions. We shared many of these. I know, looking back at minutes from previous meetings, we sent you away twice and had some specific questions for you. One was to meet with the neighbors. Whether that was completely successful or not, I don't know, but we appreciate you meeting with them and at least getting feedback from them. Another concern was the number of units. As Gary mentioned, the density remained the same, but we did reduce the number of units, which was one of the concerns we had from a lot of people. All these units will create all this traffic. Well, we just reduced traffic by several units. You know, all these kids, where will we play? And it looks like we're addressing some of those things. So I appreciate you addressing those. I was concerned about the gas pipeline, and it looks like we've reached out to the gas company, and I appreciate that. Again, as Lyle mentioned, some of these nitty-gritty things, that's not our job tonight to figure out how we're going to fix the sewer, or whether stormwater is going to, you know, be directed to Seymour Avenue or anything like that. It's, does the rezone work? So from a personal standpoint, I appreciate the effort that you've gone into to meet some of the requirements that we had, and why I believe we initially tabled this twice. Personally, I thought it's, and still think it's a good fit for this particular location. I had some concerns which have been addressed. And I appreciate you working on this and coming back with something different and not just the same thing over and over.
And likewise, I appreciate the residents and the civil manner that they went about bringing up their concerns and bringing that before us and meeting with you as well. So appreciate that as well.
All right, can we have a recommendation?
The only change that I would like to make or see made in the development agreement really is I would like to see more guest parking stalls. I think that that would be helpful to the neighborhood and to the neighbors, and maybe put that in the development agreement so that people aren't parking on the street or clogging up the intersection or whatever that they possibly could be doing to cause problems. And I agree that road that just kind of stubs out should go somewhere or do something. And I guess it'll be determined by the city whether or not that's required to have sort of a turnabout or something. Otherwise, I know we don't necessarily like higher density housing, but I think that the builder or the developer has done a really good job about as far as reaching out and communicating, and we appreciate all the input from everybody. Hopefully, you feel like you've at least been heard and listened to, and that your concerns have been able to be expressed. And you do get your chance again, if this, goes before the City Council, to do that again. I think that these types of housing options are a good idea. I think that they're necessary. I think that they do benefit the city. I don't believe that it brings in a bad element or certain types of people that we don't want in our city. I think it gives people some options. And I think that Kaysville needs to be able to provide that for its citizens in order to service everybody and to provide for the needs of everyone here. So that's what I would say.
That sort of sounded like a recommendation. Did you want to?
Well, let me just add before you start.
Okay.
I want to make sure that we have some of these issues covered in the development agreement, and I've looked through it, but I don't have a full recollection right now. Is it worthwhile mentioning that we make sure there's connectivity to the rail trail, and make sure that we have, like you said, somehow figure out a better end to that southeast corner street, which you mentioned, and then I'm still not sure what the status is of the open space. Is this going to be contingent upon them either owning or having an easement to have some open space, or is that how does the development agreement work? It doesn't address that, is that correct?
So the way that it reads, it's I think some items would be contingent to it being, whether it's easement or ownership, a part of it, because there are specific details as far as where the homes that are on the north side of the development can sit in relation to the now existing property line. So typically we would require that those be pushed back away from it. But what the development agreement does is say if this is used, whether it's by easement or ownership, then these homes could be allowed to sit right up against that property line. So even though you've got a property line right there, you still have the separation in space where we can put in easements and things if needed for public utility or buffer between neighbors. So I think whether or not it's required or necessary in one form or fashion is up to you and ultimately the council to determine if you need it to be part of it in a certain style.
To me, that open space makes a big difference. That to me is important for this development to work. So.
And I can read to you, it's item number 11, the northern approximate half acre will be included in the project by easement rights, is how it's currently stated within the agreement. So it is expecting that it be a component.
Maybe we can stick in there at least, so because it sounds like there may be, we're not going to require them to get an easement if they own the property, right?
Go ahead.
There's just been discussion on ownership on that and the advantage or disadvantage to the Nooners and to us. And I think we've come to a consensus that most likely the best option would be fee simple ownership. There was just discussion for advantages and disadvantages both ways.
Yeah,
so,
and I think just making sure there's flexibility to do it.
Yes.
Whichever, yeah.
So, but as of right now, that's the direction we're headed.
Thank you. Matthew, do you have any other comments? I think we're good. I'll have their voice.
That's fine.
Okay, can we have a recommendation?
I cut you off. Do you want to start again?
I'll make one. I just don't know how to word it properly. Do I just say, as far as the development agreement, do I just add the things that I think that we think that should be included?
It sounds like you're inclined to make a favorable recommendation, and then you would say something in the motion to the effect of with the additional requirements added to the development agreement, and then you could list one by one to make sure we catch them correctly.
Okay, are we clear on what we want
I think so.
for the development agreement?
Go ahead and start, and if there's a couple we need to add.
You can jump in. Okay. I'll make a motion to recommend approval for the rezone. Let's see, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Just a second. I'm scrolling through this. Where'd it go? Okay. I'll make a recommendation to recommend approval of the request to rezone 3 acres of property at 1576 West, 200 North, from RA to the R2 zoning district to include the PRUD overlay with the following, I don't know, additions to the development agreement?
Yep.
Okay. 8 to 10 guest parking stalls, a turnaround or something. How do I want to phrase that? A turnaround or something at where the road stubbed?
Well, we understand what you're talking about. So
Do
we
you
can get
understand what
the-
I'm talking
Sure.
about? Okay, I'm not saying that very, very eloquently. And also to make sure that the green space,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would like.
And that there's a connection to the rail trail.
oh, and that there's a connection to the rail trail, or 2 connections to the rail trail that the developer mentioned.
Anything on the fence is pretty much.
Yeah, I think it is what it is. So I think those 4 things.
Those 4 things. Is that clear? That was kind of confusing.
So we'll double check the minutes, but what I'm showing now is a minimum of 8 to 10 guest parking stalls outside of the driveways and garages. The southeast corner, ensure that I have a turnaround that's compliant if necessary per public safety. That there be open space, language change to allow for ownership or easement. And that there be, now you said two connections to the rail trail.
I believe that's what the developer mentioned.
Okay. And I, one way or the other, UTA, speaking with them, I think they'll permit that. They mostly just like to document where they are.
Okay.
And I suppose in the event that they say you only get 1 or something, we may be back. So.
Okay. That's my motion.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh,
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the public for your input, concerns, and voice. And again, this is a recommendation going to the City Council. Will be heard approximately when, Lyle?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. I was just going to mention, likely the meeting on the 21st of March is when I would expect that it will be ready to go before the City Council.
Okay, so please, by all means, if you have an opportunity between now and then,
Held that as long as it
come prepared. We often get, I'm sure the City Council gets the same thing, weeping mothers. What about the children? Come with facts, not emotions. Facts sway us. We don't like kids getting run over any more than anyone else does, but it's hard to quantify some of that. Things that you can quantify, like sewer problems or stormwater problems, things like that. Please, by all means, we encourage everyone to be here that evening. Hugh, thank you again for being here as well. The next item on our agenda is Orchard Ridge Estates Phase 1 Subdivision Final Plat.
Okay, as a reintroduction to this, it's been a while since the Planning Commission has seen this, but you'll recall east of Highway 89, the city recently went through an annexation process on some acreage east of the highway, essentially for the purpose of anticipation of this development. Ultimately on the project, the preliminary plat has been approved by the City Council. That includes the units within the R18 zone. There's an annexation agreement, and within the preliminary plat, allowed up to 95 homes. What was actually demonstrated in the plat was 92. This is all very consistent with what the preliminary plat had shown. There were some unique specific provisions granted as part of that preliminary platting process, with sidewalk only being required on one side of public streets, which I'll speak to a little bit more in a moment. Side yards had some leniency where 8 feet on one side and 5 feet on the other. Front yards were allowed at 20 feet. And then we did allow hammerhead turnarounds on the private streets rather than cul-de-sacs. This continues to show that. This first phase that's under proposal includes 26 units of the total development. Seems to be very consistent with the lot sizes, setbacks, and everything that had been shown in the preliminary is all there. I will speak to, I mentioned the sidewalk. When we did the preliminary review, ultimately the city council said you don't need sidewalk on both sides of the street. As we went through the engineering and some of the details on this one, based on the amount of cut and fill they had to do anyway for the public right-of-way to meet utility standards. And they were essentially going out past the curb flat, more than we might have expected originally. And then based on some request from Weber Basin, who provides all of our water for Layton, certainly through Kaysville for Prue Heights, they've asked us not to continue making people put in secondary systems east of Highway 89. And so just this last city council meeting, an addendum to the annexation agreement was approved where the developer agreed to put the sidewalk in on the other side where the cut and fill was there anyway, if we weren't going to be requiring them to have that secondary pressure system in place for their irrigation. So engineering's been looked over thoroughly on this one. Staff feels comfortable recommending approval for the final plat as proposed. And in this case, you are the final deciding body on the final plat. If you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to answer them. And the developer is also here this evening. We can take questions as well.
Thank you. We really wanted to pass the buck to Stroh on this one again, but I know, but we like watching you squirm more than we watch Larry squirm. All right. Is the developer here? Do you want to come on up? Thank you.
You got a row of them.
If you can just state your name.
Matt Yates with
Thank
Compass
you.
Holdings Development.
Any questions, folks? Anything that pops up? I did have a question, Lyle. The one stub road on the south end, does that connect to something or does that just end? I honestly can't remember.
So if I'm looking correctly, you're likely talking to this road here.
Yeah.
Is that correct on the map? It doesn't currently. There is a drive that kind of goes along the property line now, but would be kind of redeveloped as this project goes forward. But it's set up as was required in the annexation agreement so that if or when this property to the south develops, that there's access into it.
Okay.
Just an example, directly north of it, that's actually Layton City, is this Bromsfeld subdivision. They bumped right up into this property that we're developing so that they could connect into future development as well. So creating those connections and allowing for future properties the potential to do likewise.
Okay.
I have one question, just random. When are you planning to actually start developing this? I'm just curious.
Really soon.
Yeah,
Like,
okay, as soon as possible.
They're not already there digging around.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
All right. If there's no other questions, can we
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So talk to me about this, and we probably already did, and I've just forgotten about it, but this kind of funky road in the middle there that has a little bit of a hammerhead, and do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so the current phase we're looking at only has one private street. And it's a little bit tough to see here, so I'll go back to the map. And so again, they're just kind of doing these westerly 26 lots. So this one is a private street with a hammerhead style turnaround. Ben specifically agreed that the hammerhead would work, meets the radii and distances, and the fire department has improved on that. I don't know if you're referring to this one
That's the one I'm
further
talking
to
about,
the east. So it's a similar deal again where it's another private street. I don't know if there's a specific question to it, but in order to accommodate the number of homes they were hoping to do, dealing with the slopes, and which is pretty rare for Kaysville development that we have here on the mountainside, laid out that way, and there are lots above it, frankly, and there's, I think, a retaining wall kind of at the edge of this street. So when we did the preliminary plating, I think we talked and it looked at specifically kind of the double frontage lots and if that was desirable or not, and it was decided that would be okay, especially with the retaining wall and kind of the separation that created from a typical double lot scenario and situation.
And so that was in the preliminary plat, that, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because with that one, I was just looking at the topography up there too. I was wondering if, emergency vehicles had to get up in there, they would have to actually, that'd be quite a chore backing out if they pulled up into there. But you're right, we've already approved that in the preliminary.
Yeah, so again, the final details and the slope and all that, when they get to that phase, we'll have to double check, but the general idea, it appeared to work with our emergency services.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, someone want to make a motion?
Go ahead and make a motion, given that this proposed final plat's consistent with the annexation agreement and the preliminary plat and applicable standards and ordinances. I would recommend approval for Orchard Ridge Estate Phase 2 subdivision for Compass Holding Development, approximately 1400 North, Highway 89.
Second.
If I can make one technical non-recommendation, but you would be approving the final plat.
Oh, did I say approve?
I think he said recommend.
Oh,
approval, so.
okay, I'll take that back.
Come on, be aggressive.
One more.
Aggressive.
If you're willing to accept
No,
his suggestion.
haven't had my Diet Coke for the last 2 hours. Nope, I'd make a motion that we approve for Orchard Ridge Estates Phase 1 subdivision final plat for Compass Holding Development at approximately 1400 North Highway 89.
I'll second it again.
Okay.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay. Can scroll through this faster. Come on. We're going to go to Betty's here.
Yeah.
We're going to have a call to the public. Anyone that would like to come to the microphone and express themselves, talk about their recent trip to Republican City, anything?
We can wait.
All right, if there's no public, we'll reports, correspondence, other matters.
Yeah, we'll just be brief. So we'll just be on for a normal schedule back in March on the 14th and 28th. And unless the commission yourselves have anything to request or reports to make, I'll leave it brief at that.
All right, thank you.
I move we adjourn.
We are so adjourned. Thank you all very much. We've got 3% left. So.
It's died right after the.
What's that?